Hello! In this video I'm going to show you how I go about replacing a pressure sensor in a Vaillant boiler, because the boiler is coming up with that F75 fault. Now, not all the pressure sensors are in the same position on the Vaillant boilers, but the process to replace them is exactly the same. If you have a Glowworm boiler, then this video will help you as well, because Glowworm use the same pressure sensor. Now, the F75 fault is not always caused by your pressure sensor. It could be because you've got a faulty pump, a faulty pressure vessel, or maybe just a capacitor has gone inside your pump. And of course, I've made videos all about how I go about replacing all these parts. You'll find these videos in the cards above now or down in the description, where there are lots of links to other help videos. Now, I have made a video which goes before this video, and that's how the pressure sensor works and what effect it has on your boiler if it's faulty. So you might want to check that one out as well. If you want a little more technical information, like why they moved the pressure sensor from the bottom to the top, then stick around to the end of the video and I'll explain. One last important point: to get to the pump, I need to remove the cover of the boiler. When I remove the cover, that will affect combustion of the gas in the main heat exchanger. Because of this, only gas registered engineers should be removing the covers of Vaillant boilers. In the description below, I've left links to the gas register where you can find a gas registered engineer in the UK. Right, now let's get on with changing this pressure sensor. So just a quick recap: here's my boiler and it says F75 on the display. If I reset the boiler like that, the boiler restarts. We can see the central heating is on. And on this boiler, if I press the minus button, I can then see exactly how much pressure is in the boiler. On the new Vaillant boilers, we need to press a button to light the display up. Then we press the button underneath the radiator symbol. And then we press it again. And then we can see exactly how much pressure is in the boiler. Now, if that pressure does not change when the pump runs, then the boiler will lock out with F75. And there you go, the boiler is now just locked out again with F75. And that's because the pressure sensor has become faulty, it's overreading and has become stuck. So it needs to be replaced. So the first thing I'm going to do is to turn the boiler off, because I don't want the boiler running when I'm changing the pressure sensor. But the safest thing to do is always just turn the boiler off from the isolation switch on the wall. I'm then going to isolate the boiler from the rest of the system by closing both the flow and the return valves. That's the flow valve closed, and then I'm going to turn this valve over here and close that one. So now the return valve is also closed. And I always use a 4mm Allen key bit to close the valves. So when I take a look at the valves, I can now see that the screwdriver slot goes across the valve, telling me that the valve is closed. When the screwdriver slot is in line with the valve and the pipework, the valve is open. I don't always isolate the boiler. If I think the valves look at all dodgy, like they've been leaking, and I don't really want to turn them, then all I do is to put the boiler into hot water mode. So I run the hot water tap, then turn the boiler off. That will create an airlock on the central heating system, so I should then be able to change the pressure sensor without lots of water pouring out, but I'll still need to drop the pressure on the system, and I'll need to drain more water out because I haven't isolated the boiler from the rest of the central heating system. Now, I just showed you the two drain points which are on the Vaillant boilers. These are really easy to get to, just use an adjustable spanner, undo the nut on the end, and then the water will come out of the drain point there. Obviously, I've got a bowl underneath to catch the water. Now, the water does tend to spray around a bit, and sometimes it can be quite dirty, so I always make sure I protect the surrounding areas. Here's a little tip for you: if you push a rubber tube onto the outlet, then the water comes out as a nice steady stream and you can direct it really easily into your bowl. And there you go, you can see how much cleaner and easier that is. After the water has stopped coming out of the drain valve and the pressure is down to 0, I'm then going to close that drain valve back up again, because as soon as I remove the pressure sensor, that will then break the airlock and I get water pouring out of that drain valve. And there we go, my boiler is now all drained down and I'm ready to replace the pressure sensor. Now, depending on the age of your boiler, it depends on where your pressure sensor is going to be. On your older boilers, the pressure sensor is down at the bottom here, and that's the pressure sensor just there. On the newer boilers, the pressure sensor is in the middle of the boiler and it's on the return pipe. I need to remove the air inlet tube to get to this pressure sensor. It's just one screw, it folds down and then just pulls away. Replacing either of these pressure sensors is exactly the same and pretty straightforward. but the one at the top is just a little bit more tricky because it's a bit more awkward to get to. And there we go, that's the pressure sensor tucked away back there. So I'm going to remove the lower pressure sensor first. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to remove the electrical clip from the front of the pressure sensor. Now there's a little black retaining clip which I need to lift up. You can see it a bit clearer here. I use my little screwdriver to lift the clip up and then pull gently on the lead, and hopefully the electrical plug will then just come out. But sometimes they can be a little stubborn and they just take a little bit more wiggling to get them out. But there you go, that's that clip released. Then I can just give it a wiggle and gently pull it out of the pressure sensor. And there we go, it's now unplugged. I don't want it to get wet, so I'm going to tuck it up and out the way so there's no chance that any water is going to get onto the plug when I remove the pressure sensor. There we are, that's now tucked out the way. Now I'm ready to remove the pressure sensor. Now there's a silver retaining clip. If I push up from the bottom, I can push it up like that to make it easy to get hold of it. I then use my long nose pliers, just hold the little clip and then just pull it out of the pressure sensor like that. Now I could use this clip again, or I could use the new one which comes in the pressure sensor kit. Before I remove the old pressure sensor, I'm going to prepare the new one. So here is my new pressure sensor, and here's the O-ring which goes onto the pressure sensor to seal it. As usual, I'm going to use some silicone grease to grease up the O-ring so I get a good seal, and then I'll just wipe that around the O-ring, and then I slip the O-ring onto the pressure sensor so that I get a really good seal. And there we are, that's that done, and now that is prepared and ready to go straight in the hole. Now it's just a case of getting a good hold of the pressure sensor and pulling it out. Sometimes I find they can be a little stubborn and it just takes a little bit more of a wiggle to get them out. But this one's now come out, so I can now just take it away and then pop the new one straight back in the hole. Give it a good old push, I'll feel it click into place, and that's it. I'm just going to rotate it around so the clip is at the top, like that. Then I get the retainer clip and just pop it back into its slot. There we go. Push it down, make sure it goes all the way down, like that. And then of course I grab the pressure sensor, give it a good old tug and make sure it is definitely locked in position. And then it's just a case of getting the electrical plug, plugging it back into the pressure sensor. It needs to go all the way in so the little black retaining clip clips over the top of the plug, like that. And there we go, that's the pressure sensor replaced. Now when we turn the boiler back on, we should now have F22 and 0 bar flashing in the display, indicating that we have no pressure in our boiler. Now it's just a case of opening the two valves and topping up the boiler. I'll go into a bit more detail on topping up your boiler on the other pressure sensor in just a minute or two. I thought I'd just mention, whenever I got the boiler drained down, I always check the pressure vessel and recharge it if necessary. If you want to know more about pressure vessels, then of course I made a video all about that, and you'll find that in the cards above now or in the description. Just a quick note regarding the pressure sensors. I spoke to Vaillant technical department and they assured me that the pressure sensors in all the Vaillant boilers right across the range are the same, even though some of the part numbers may be different. Apart from the very early boilers like the EcoMax and Turbomax, which use something like this. One last important note about this lower pressure sensor. Sometimes when I remove the pressure sensor, I'll get a whole lot more water come running out this hole, and then I always have my vacuum handy to suck up that water. But the more important point is that in the back of this hole here, you maybe see there's like a gauze or a strainer. There is actually a strainer or a filter in the back there. And if you look closely at the bottom of the hole, there are flakes of magnetite. Now this strainer is there to stop any bits of magnetite like those from going into the plate heat exchanger and blocking it up. And I literally came across this only the other day. Initially I thought the plate heat exchanger needed to be replaced, but on further investigation I found that this little area here was completely blocked with magnetite. And it just wasn't letting the flow go through the plate heat exchanger, so the water was going hot and cold. But after giving it a really good clean, the boiler was then working fine, and the plate heat exchanger was not needed. Before I show you how I go about changing that top pressure sensor, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Mark Ballard and I've been a gas registered engineer for nearly 30 years. The aim of my channel is to help you with your central heating and your plumbing. If you find this video at all useful, then please give me that little bit of feedback by clicking on that thumbs up or the subscribe. You can ring on the bell if you want to receive a notification, and of course you can share the video with your friends. If you visit my website, I have categorized all my videos and products and parts that I recommend so you can easily find what you're looking for. And I'd like to say a really big thank you to everybody who's bought me a cup of coffee and left me a donation in my Toolbox fund. It's really appreciated and it does really help me to make more videos which will hopefully help you. So here's the other pressure sensor at the top here, and of course we got my electrical lead, and I've got to do exactly the same thing again. So I'm going to use my little electrical screwdriver and just lift up that little clip so I can pull out the electrical plug. Again, it can be fiddly and sometimes the plug doesn't seem to want to come out. But there we go, the clip's now released. I can give it a wiggle and pull out the plug. Now I'm going to tuck that out the way so if I do get any drips of water, it doesn't go onto that electrical plug. Now I need to remove the retaining clip. Again, I'm going to push it from the other side. I do sometimes use a screwdriver just to give it a lever out, but on this occasion I could push it out with my finger quite easily. Then it's just a case of getting my long nose pliers. I then hold the clip and pull it out to the side. I can only pull it halfway out and then I have to move my pliers, re-grip it and then pull it the rest of the way out. And there we go, that's now removed. Then I'm very careful not to drop it because it is very easy just to drop that and it does fall down the back of the boiler where it's virtually impossible to get hold of it. Now it's just a case of pulling out the pressure sensor and fitting the new one. Now I've already prepared the new one, so I've greased up that O-ring like I showed you in the first part of the video. Now it's just a case of grabbing hold of the pressure sensor and pulling it out of its hole. As soon as I remove it, there will be water running out of the boiler like that. So I'm going to quickly replace it with the new one. I would usually do it a lot quicker than that. So I'd hold the new one in my hand, pull the old one out, drop it and then put the new one straight in the hole. That way I get very little spillage. If we take a look at this pressure sensor, which I've just removed from this boiler here, you can see that the end of the pressure sensor is all blocked up with magnetite. And that's why the pressure sensor was overreading and they were getting F75 coming up in their display. I've now just rotated the pressure sensor around so the clip is at the top. Now I'm going to get my long nose pliers and hold that new clip and then pop it in the hole. Now this is definitely a little bit tricky and sometimes it does take a little while to get the clip in. But on this occasion I've got it straight away and it's just popped straight back in the hole. So there you go, that's probably one of my quickest times I've had to replace it. Sometimes it can be a real struggle to get that little clip in the correct position. So now I give the pressure sensor a good old tug again, try pulling it out just to make sure that that clip is retaining the pressure sensor correctly. Because trust me, you do not want that thing bursting off and spraying water all over all your electrical components in your boiler. Now all I need to do is to plug the electrical lead back into the sensor. Once I've got that lined up with its hole, like that, I can then just push it in the rest of the way, making sure the clip goes over the plug. And there we go, that's that pressure sensor now replaced. Now I just need to refit the air intake. I push it onto the gas valve, fold it up into position, and then do up the screw. As I'm doing up the screw, I always push against the air intake, making sure that it stays properly located on the gas valve inlet. Because I do sometimes come across boilers where they have not been properly located, and that will affect combustion of the gas, which is obviously bad. I can now open up the flow and the return valves. So that's the flow valve open, and then I'm going to open up the return valve. As I open up the valves, I may hear some water rush into the boiler as the pressure inside the central heating system is still higher than the pressure within the boiler. Now it's just a case of topping up the boiler or system. On the Vaillant Ecotech Plus boilers, we've got the two handles underneath. Just open both of these. If you've got a Vaillant Pro, you'll need to find a filling loop and top the boiler up from there. And we're looking to get about 1.5 bar. If you have a gauge on the front of your boiler, that's about the middle of the grey area. If you have a Vaillant which only has a digital display, then we're looking to get that black bar level to about the middle of the display. And if we want to check how much pressure exactly is in the boiler, if we press the button underneath the radiator symbol, then we press it again, it then takes us to the display which shows us exactly how much pressure is in our boiler, which in this case is 1.7 bar. And there we go, the boiler's back up and running now, and now I've got a happy homeowner because they're no longer getting that F75 fault. Now if you're interested, here's 2 bits of technical information for you. If I leave the boiler on when I change the pressure sensor, the boiler will come up with an F73 fault. The F73 fault is telling me that the boiler has lost connection with the pressure sensor, or that the pressure sensor is faulty, and obviously that's the case because it's been disconnected. So at the end of the job, if I've got an F73, it's most likely going to be because the plug is not fully plugged onto the pressure sensor. Here's a bit of technical information for you about the pressure sensor position. On the earlier Ecotech boilers, the pressure sensor was down at the bottom here, and that is after the main heat exchanger. As we know, over time we may get some resistance through the main heat exchanger, which will lead to some pressure loss. And if the pressure sensor is getting a little sticky, that could lead to the F75 fault. On the newer Vaillant boilers, they moved the pressure sensor so it was on the pipework directly after the pump, so before the main heat exchanger. That removed a lot of problems with boilers coming up with F75 because the pressure sensor was after the main heat exchanger. Also, having the pressure sensor before the main heat exchanger means it runs a lot cooler, which is obviously much better for the pressure sensor. If your pressure sensor is at the bottom of the boiler, which is after the main heat exchanger, you can move it to the top of the boiler, so it's then before the main heat exchanger and directly after the pump, which is obviously much better. But that's providing the new pipework is installed in the boiler. If you have this plastic part on the pipework which the pressure sensor goes into, and there will be a brass plug in that position. So it will be just a case of removing the brass plug and fitting the pressure sensor in its position and putting the brass plug in the pressure sensor's position at the bottom of the boiler. There's only one problem, and that is that the electrical lead is clipped in at a lower position, so it won't reach. If that clip is cut, then there's plenty of wire and it will reach to the higher position without any problem at all. But cutting that clip is actually really quite tricky, and it's very easy by accident to cut one of the wires, which you definitely do not want to do. If you have the pipes which have the rubber hoses on, then you won't have that plastic fitting. But these pipes can be replaced with the newer pipes which are all copper, and they would have that plastic fitting for the pressure sensor. Right, that's about it then. So if you want to know how I go about changing a pump, you can click on the link just here. If you want to watch my playlist with all the videos in, I made the little link just there. Of course, please give me a thumbs up, share me with your friends, subscribe, ring that bell, and as always, my toolbox friend. Bye for now, and I'll see you next time.